this video, we're going to have a chat through locative storytelling and writing for apps. So we're going to delve a little bit into interactivity and transmedia and what those mean and what the rules are, and then some case studies of all of the different types of locative-based work in a bunch of different creative industries that people have done to kind of get your creative juices flowing. So interactivity and transmedia are two different things. So interactivity for storytelling is when a reader must interact or perform some action of the story to continue, or the reader's actions or choices affect the direction of the story and how it ends. Interactivity promotes an active state of learning rather than a passive state of learning. Whereas transmedia is storytelling which is across multiple platforms. So each element makes distinctive contributions to a user's understanding of the story universe, whether they be video, audio, text, text messages, emails, all of those kind of things are different mediums for that writing. So stories or projects created for location can be a combination of these two things, interactivity and transmedia. And by combining the two of them, you actually end up with the most immersive experiences. The rules of transmedia are pretty simple. So first, does it actually have something to say? Because comedy is fine, but a joke is not worth chasing. So projects of this nature require work on the part of the audience, and the story and the experience needs to communicate something potent and human and has an originality that thrives on the use of different media if you're going to be using transmedia. So if you make them expel all of this effort for no return, say like boring location, making them bounce back and forth between media, only for it to end in a joke, people are not going to rate your experience highly. So always make sure that the story or the section of your each small section of your transmedia has something to say. The next is that the characters need to be compelling. Good stories are marked by characters that yearn and struggle and triumph and face defeat. And if your character is someone they can't relate to, or your antagonist is not something that they've experienced, then they're not going to be compelled to follow an experience to see what happens. A story is about characters in conflict, not plot. Next, you need to make sure you avoid repetition. Make sure that the story elements are self-contained but additive. So the protagonist of the story does not have to be the star of each piece of medium you use, whether it's video or audio or text. And so each section has to be a complete experience. So if it's viewed on its own, it has a story on its own, but also increases the appreciation of the narrative as a whole when you view all of them together. The final rule for transmedia is that the work needs to leverage the strengths of each medium that it uses. So if you are going to use a mobile phone and an app like Story City, emphasize the user's intimacy with their device. If something is better as a visual, use images or video. If you are after atmosphere, then music is your best friend. And don't write "they knocked on the door" if there is a way that you can do it in a better medium. I wanted to take you through some case studies of various projects. So first, have a little bit of a look into locative literature, which is essentially written locative projects. So there are dozens of apps that take advantage of the mobile nature of devices. And in these apps, they write for location. So either it's set in a really interesting place, or it makes use of an activity that the participant is doing in the real world. So take, for example, historic or walking tour apps, which many councils create for their cities that show people interesting locations, monument, history, and buildings. And a lot of people use Story City for that exact purpose. But then take a project like Silent History. Now, Silent History has both a group of writers who were hired for the project, and then they collaborate with the readers of the project. So it's a serialized story presented in an app form. And so the story is created and made for select locations, and it's about a generation of unusual children who were born without the ability to create or comprehend language. And so the central story was written by that team of writers who was hired. So it was told through the testimonials of people who had met these children, and you can read these in the comfort of your own home within the app. But then there are field reports that can only be read when the GPS on your particular device matches the coordinates of the story. So these filed reports are written in collaboration with the readers of the story and enhance it. So another app that is using location and also narrative is Zombies Run, which uses running as its main activity. So technically it is a fitness app, but what it does is it narrates a zombie story to you as you run. So it's been so incredibly popular that they now have 8 seasons of this story, where you are essentially a runner in a zombie apocalypse world, and you are gathering a whole bunch of different resources for the people in your community to help them survive this zombie apocalypse. And so the GPS tracks how fast you are going, and when the story changes and say zombies are running after you or whatnot, the GPS tracks whether or not you're running faster to outrun the zombies, and if you don't, the zombies get you and you die. So the music and sound design in Zombies Run is a super great example of using music to contribute to locative literature and create atmosphere. So it not only has a soundscape created behind the narration of the story, but then in between the little bits of story, it actually allows you to tap into the playlists on your device, being able to create those wonderful juxtapositions between the music that you normally exercise to, and also the rising tension and the looming of zombies on the horizon, to mix that reality in together with the fiction. The final case study is Matt Blackwood's Sticky Stories. Now, Matt Blackwood is a Melbourne-based writer who creates bits of flash fiction on post-it notes and then sticks them on the wall in a particular location. And those stories are meant to be set in that location. They were up there for anywhere from 3 to 6 months and were regularly read and shared on social media. And that's just a very, very simple example of the power of stories and location, and how you can play with these types of things. So the next case studies that I wanted to have a chat about are ones to do with music and soundscapes. So there have been several that I've come across in the years that do some amazing work in the locative sound area. So both Luke and Ben use speakers to create soundscapes in physical space. So what Luke does is he will set up a field of speakers in an area, and so we're talking like 50 to 100 speakers, and each will make slightly different sounds. So the music you hear as you move through this field of speakers is different depending on where you're standing in the space. With Ben, he also set up speakers throughout a space, but he set up sensors attached to those speakers so that the music that comes out on them depends on how a person moves through the space. So different locations, different speeds, even different size people will change the music that is played and how fast or slow it is played. And so he created that for an event called Splash Adelaide several years ago during the Fringe Festival that they have in Adelaide. Then you get projects like the middle one on the screen in B flat, which has placed a collage of videos into a web page that can literally be played in any order at any time, and they will fit together. So it allows the audience to do their own remix of the music. Lots of fun. And then you get more complex projects like the ACO Virtual Orchestra, which was created by a Sydney company called Mod Productions, and this studio essentially recorded the Australian Symphony Orchestra playing a particular piece. So they actually recorded it with 3D cameras, And then from these cameras based on a back screen, they were then able to create an iPad installation for museums, where in this blank room they set up these different projectors and iPads, and it allows you to turn on and off particular musicians during the performance, so you can hear only the certain instruments or however many that you turn on. And so again, you get to remix how this music goes together. So that's a great way that people have played with sound and interactivity and location in different projects that I've come across. The final set of case studies that I wanted to talk about was interactive art. So I have a couple of examples here on the slide. On the top left, there are many cities across the world that do this now, but I knew it as Adelaide's Northern Lights, where artwork, sometimes animated, sometimes still, was projected onto historic buildings in the city, essentially remaking them and telling a story. Then you have projects like the one on the top right, where there have been several projects in Asia that have seen artists project giant faces onto trees in the region, and those projections are activated by people walking past. And then you could take it a step further and associate it with music or stories or narration. Then on the bottom right, you have something as simple as poetry artwork or street art in parks that merge words with images or activities. And then you have those projects like augmented reality apps like Pokemon Go, which overlay fictional characters over the camera app in your phone. This requires a bunch of animation skills and coding, but you could essentially do things like this as a way of making art interactive and digital. And there are softwares like Aurasma which allow people to play around with that augmented reality, but at the moment it requires a lot of knowledge of animation and coding, which I'm hoping that Story City can help creatives solve in the future, to allow people to create this kind of immersive storytelling experience without needing that kind of technical knowledge. In the next video, we're going to be talking about some of the different types of adventures that you can create for this type of locative app.